Another reason General Assembly and political leadership in this state are so out of touch with reality is they will not consider alternative views, the cancel culture, if you will. Governor McKee, we criticize Governor McKee for only listening to his director of, Rhode Island Department of Health directors, not doing any independent research like governors did in other states and coming to different conclusions because the research was there. And if Andy Boston could find the research, a high-paying person in government could find the research to prove that mask mandates and vaccine mandates weren't going to be effective, if not probably even be harmful. Same thing in the General Assembly. They've got this narrative, this liberal, left, progressive narrative that we must tax the rich, we must do everything we can to fight climate change, even though it's an unwinnable war in Rhode Island. There's nothing Rhode Island can do to combat climate change, yet we're burdening energy users and taxpayers and motorists with high energy costs, high gas costs, high electricity costs, limited choices. Soon electrical vehicle mandates are coming our way where you won't even be able to buy a gasoline powered car in this state. That's coming up in a few years if you didn't know that. They refuse to look beyond the generally accepted left-wing narrative. We just follow the narrative, true or false. We'll just impose policies based on that false narrative, good or bad. At least we followed the narrative. At least we didn't piss off anybody in our caucus or in our national or state party. That's the state of politics in this state and in far too much of this country. What can I do to appease as many people as possible while pissing off as few people as possible, regardless of whether it's good or not for the men and women we represent as elected officials? This is the state of politics. This is the state of the legislative process in our state. It's all designed to keep you and me out of it, to make it as difficult as possible for them to hear those other perspectives, to hear from the people of Rhode Island and only listen to with their blinders on, listen to and see the advice of their tribal or party leaders. Something's got to change.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Ocean State Current Command Bunker. Now playing from in the dugout, number 37, Mike Stenhouse.
Just another Wuhan Wednesday. Wish it was the same day. Just another Wuhan Wednesday. Wish it was the same day. Just another Wuhan Wednesday.
On this Wuhan Wednesday, we explore yet another contrived and government-promoted hoax, the false claims about conservative disinformation and the need for censorship of arguments, almost any and all arguments that counter the government's false narratives. Through the University of Rhode Island, the United States State Department, and Department of Homeland Security is actually training American educators using German socialist strategy for bringing indoctrination techniques right into our own K through 12 classrooms, such that they can inoculate students against conservative ideas. Think about that. And they're using your taxpayer money to do it. They want to turn students into political activists and putting anti-speech censorship tools to censor conservative media and thought into our schools. Think about that. And you think it sounds crazy. Wait till you hear this interview because today we're going to discuss the shocking findings. And nobody else in Rhode Island seems to care, but we're going to discuss the shocking findings with the author of two recent reports by the Media Research Center, which expose this collusion between the federal government, state agencies right here in our own Rhode Island government, other organizations, and local nonprofits. It's a scandal, and you're going to hear all about it today. Welcome to the Dugout. Your host, Mike Stenhouse here. Today, we're going to spend 100% of our time on this very important issue. We've talked about indoctrinating our kids from all other kinds of cultural issues, controversial race and gender theories, over-sexualization of our kids, and the list goes on and on. The bastardization of American history and the founding fathers. Now we're adding a new component to it. Media literacy. It's a scam. It's a scam to teach kids and to actually to discount conservative views, if not, and then tools in the classroom to actually censor those views. In just a second, we're going to bring on Tim Kilcullen. He's an attorney with that Media Research Center who published these reports. We broke this story last spring about Courageous Rhode Island being funded through the University of Rhode Island, which in turn was funded by the Department of Homeland Security. We thought it was bad enough what was happening here in Rhode Island. But I think what you're about to learn today, that it's much broader than that, and that the University of Rhode Island's role in this, it's much broader than just what happens here in Rhode Island. That the University of Rhode Island is ground zero for this illicit media literacy scam being funded by the Department of Homeland Security. Adam, let's go to our interview. All right, so let's not tarry any longer. Let's get right down to it and bring in the author of that report, Mr. Tim Kilcullen. Tim, welcome to In the Dugout.
Thank you for having me.
I see you're playing ball. Show us what, or tell us what your hat says.
Pretty self-explanatory. I'm
all aboard the Trump train. Okay, good. So
Choo-choo.
you're a MAGA guy. Okay, yeah, we've had a few on. We've had a few anti-Trumpers on. So hey, those with TDS, but whatever. Hey, we have Democrats on as well. Okay, so you are an attorney with the Media Research Center. You're specializing recently in the censorship investigation project that we're going to get into in just a minute. But first, just tell our viewers what is the Media Research Center, MRC?
So the MRC, it's a media watchdog agency. So it was founded in the 80s by L. Brent Bozell, who's still the founder and CEO. And its goal was to hold media accountable because they recognized how leftist the media had become, how aggressive they were in trying to squash conservative opinions. So it was to keep them accountable. But now in the digital age, it's expanded to fighting censorship, specifically, the efforts of Amazon, Google, Facebook, Twitter, now X, to stamp out conservative voices by like the New York Post story, banning President Trump. It's just every day.
And are you talking about government influenced efforts to stamp out conservative voices, or even if it's just the private?
Even if it's the private, if you can call it, yes.
Okay. Now, I don't know if you can separate the two because they seem to be pretty closely intertwined.
Yeah.
All right. So you mentioned Brent Bozell is the founder. I think most of us who watch cable news have seen Brent on many cable news shows talking about media bias out there. So we're going to talk about this media literacy scam funded. By the way, let me just share this first. This is the article, and this is the article on Ocean State Current. It's at the very top. Rhode Island government colludes with feds to indoctrinate students via media literacy scam. Now that's just part of the issue because there's a national effort underway too. Rhode Island is just one piece of it. We're going to get to the Rhode Island specific component of in just a minute. But I think the best way, Tim, to start, if it's okay with you, let's watch this 2-minute video from Brent Bozell basically explaining what's going on here. We'll stop along the way and comment. Sound okay?
Sounds good.
All right, here we go.
The MRC censorship project is breaking a story I guarantee the leftist media won't report, precisely because it uncovers a new effort to censor conservatives. The Biden administration.
And by the way, Tim, I want to jump right in here. We've broken this story 6 months ago about URI more recently, and nobody else in the media will cover it here. Seeing the same thing nationally?
Well, actually, we've had some luck. Daily Wire and the Federalist both were really great in hammering this issue after we broke it.
All right, let's keep going with Brent.
Is actively trying to keep Americans from learning about conservative ideas, training teachers to use censorship tools in their classrooms to teach students how to avoid so-called untrustworthy conservative news sites and instead learn to listen to what left-wing groups like Ad Fontes and NewsGuard recommend. Utilizing public records requests, MRC has learned that the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security have funded a censorship effort that is also turning children into left-wing activists.
All right, Tim, we all remember the Mary Poppins failed Ministry of Truth or Disinformation Center that I think it was DHS, right?
Yeah,
Homeland
DHS,
Security and tried years ago, and that got ridiculed and shot down. Is this their next attempt to do it, in your view?
Yes, it is. So Mayorkas speaks frequently about his whole of society approach, and he describes it as the government can work with private actors to accomplish the administration's agenda. So it's about partnering with academic institutions, with activist groups, with for-profit businesses, and then ultimately with big tech to silence Americans.
So no question in your mind, this is an extension of the failed Mary Poppins experiment.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's get back to Brent Brozell and finish his summary of what's going on here. Then we'll really dig into some details.
What is particularly shocking here, folks, is that this program was funded by our tax dollars. The State Department trained educators on how to inoculate students against ideas not approved by the left. Over 700 teachers participated in a year-long series of 11 State Department seminars hosted by the University of Rhode Island's Media Education Lab. One session of the State Department.
So were these, just very quickly, were these 11 State Department web seminars all in Rhode Island or across the country?
So they were hosted by the University of Rhode Island, which financed by Rhode Island tax dollars and then a grant from the State Department. But they were actually hosted virtually out of Würzburg, Germany, through the University of Würzburg. So it was a partnership through the U.S. Embassy to Germany.
All right. But participants were not just Rhode Islanders.
No, they were from across the country.
Okay, let's keep going.
Department seminars centered on how to train children as political activists. This curriculum included lessons promoting street protest for leftist causes and detailed instructions on how to turn school children into media producers who advocate against free speech. The NewsGuard portion of the curricula was funded in part by activist billionaires George and Alexander Soros. This should tell you everything you need to know. In part 2 of this study, the MRC Censorship Investigation Project will detail how the Department of Homeland Security built on these efforts, rolling them out nationwide. Please read this report.
All right, so let's stop there, and and as we'll talk about later in our interview, Tim, Rhode Island was one of those places, but I think as we're going to
Rhode Island was ground zero. This was Rhode Island was the incubation program that they then used to take nationwide.
All right, so Rhode Island and the University of Rhode Island, with as the means, were ground zero for this?
Absolutely, yeah. So it starts with the State Department. They partner with this German woke university, the University of Würzburg, and used the University of Rhode Island to take German censorship strategies and German indoctrination strategies and put them in American classrooms. So University of Rhode Island's Media Education Lab, run by a lady named Renee Hobbs, she's an anti-cop activist, been involved in leftist activism for decades. She conducts these seminars to teach teachers across America how to put ad fontes in schools, NewsGuard in schools. These are censorship tools that are designed to block, to disparage, and to steer students away from conservative outlets.
All right, so we're going to dig in. So basically, they're asking schools. We're going to get into some of the training. We're going to get into some of what they do with students, but they're basically giving these ad fontes, and this news. These are tools that censor conservative media and promote liberal media.
Yes, that's correct.
All right, so that's the gist of what's going on here. That's how teachers are being trained to indoctrinate.
That's certainly how it started with the State Department. By the time DHS got involved, it had expanded greatly. It was involving Bloomberg gun activism, turning children into media producers. But yeah, it began in Rhode Island, first with the State Department, using the University of Rhode Island to train teachers across America how to be more German.
And they want to inoculate students, like Brent Bozell said, against ideas not approved by the left. Now, I've looked at some of their online descriptions of what their curricula entails, and they're always giving examples of supposed right-wing conspiracies like Russia, Trump being engaged with Russia or whatever it is, right? That are false, and saying, and saying we're the truth because we believe in these things. I mean, it's completely backwards, but it is clearly attacking conservative ideas and promoting left-wing ideas. No doubt about that.
Absolutely.
All right. Tell us a little bit more about what these tools in the classrooms do. These ad fontes and these NewsGuard tools. What are they? Are they basically firewalls that restrict websites from coming up in a school building that either don't meet some kind of standard, left-wing standard?
Yeah, so ad fontes and NewsGuard they both call themselves media ratings firms. So they give scores to every media outlet that they choose to recognize and grade it on a scale based on reliability. And NewsGuard actually has a browser plugin that you put on a computer, and that they're trying to put in school computers, that has a pop-up come up on the screen saying, like, warning, this could be unreliable, whenever you click on a conservative outlet.
All right, I want to take a step back. You talked about Rhode Island being ground zero. I meant to go here first. My apologies. So while Rhode Island is the epicenter of this national effort, there are specific funding programs within each state. In Rhode Island, for instance, over $750,000 was a grant to the University of Rhode Island to then propagate out to groups like Courageous Rhode Island and other groups to try to push this project forward. So that's one, but Rhode Island's not the only state that received dedicated funding from DHS. How many states, how much money has Department of Homeland Security invested in this initiative?
$40 million. It's part of Secretary Mayorkas's whole of society approach. He's creating creating cedar groups around the country that are supposed to grow into activist group, indoctrination groups. The DHS money is just the starter money. And then they assemble a network of, local donors, businesses that partner with them. And he's bragged that he has already created 30 activist groups are now up and running. But Rhode Island's is
like Courageous RI?
Courageous Rhode Island is probably the most sinister. And that's because, no, it is. So it's actually three organizations. It's the Media Education Lab, which is part of the University of Rhode Island. But the fiscal agent for both the DHS grant and the State Department grant is an organization called Media Literacy Now. And that's a national lobbying group. It's based in Swampscott, Massachusetts, but it's got chapters across the country. And what they do is they focus on state legislatures and school boards and try to mandate what they call media literacy education, which is censorship and indoctrination. What they don't disclose is that they have a funding agreement with this for-profit censorship firm, Ad Fontes, with the actual media ratings firm. The president of their boards, Jennifer Furlong, she is the communications director for Ad Fontes. Their advisory council has the CEO of Ad Fontes on it, and they're getting a 10% kickback every time Ad Fontes sells a subscription.
Who's getting the kickback?
This lobbying group, Media Literacy Now. So they go to state legislators. They went to Greg Amore back when he was a state rep.
Hey, so we're just promoting free speech. You should buy this tool, school district or school, and we're not going to tell you, but we get a kickback on it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. Now, all right. So let me understand. Let me understand how this works. So school districts buy these censorship tools.
Mhm.
They have to be convinced to buy them. Roughly, what are they spending? What is an Ad Fontes license cost per year or a NewsGuard?
It's negotiated. It's all behind paywalls. You need to go through a process, a sales pitch, basically.
I mean, are we talking tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars? Do you have any
less.
idea?
It's in the low thousands.
All right, so it's not a massive spend by a school district, but still they're spending money to
and often they're required to. The goal is to get these media literacy mandates and then say installing Ad Fontes, teaching Ad Fontes in the classroom is a way to comply with this mandate.
And do they buy directly from Ad Fontes and NewsGuard or through this media research lab?
Oh no, they buy directly through Ad Fontes. So Media Literacy Now tells them, hey, here's this mandate we got. You can comply by working with Ad Fontes. They never disclose, oh, and we're getting paid by Ad Fontes. They just refer the school to Ad Fontes, and then Ad Fontes gets their censorship right in the school and makes.
I want to raise up. All right, go ahead. Sorry, finish up.
So that the State Department recognizes this. The Department of Homeland Security recognizes it. So they're now using federal money to supercharge Media Literacy Now's lobbying efforts across the country.
Right. All right, let's go back to the national overview. You mentioned $40 million Department of Homeland Security. Now, this is a scheme completely cooked up by Mayorkas, who right now, as we interview this, is about to undergo an impeachment. This did not exist before Mayorkas?
No, he's running it now. It was not actually cooked up by him. It was cooked up by Miles Taylor. So you remember the guy, he wrote a New York Times op-ed, "I'm the resistance" inside the Trump administration.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
a little saboteur. He came up with it. He was the mastermind of this program. And what's funny is now in these Rhode Island events,
and he started developing this while he was working in the Trump administration.
Yes, and he brags that he was doing it with the resistance against orders by the Trump administration. He got this program installed after in the chaos when Kristen Nielsen was fired as DHS secretary, and he brags in interviews, "Oh, the Trump administration didn't want me doing it. They opposed this. I was sneaking to Capitol Hill without them knowing." He's very blunt about it now. Wow. I mean, it's the ultimate epitome of the deep state.
All right, so this and they call it, what's their name for it? They call it what? The what?
The Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention Program. And
so I want to get to that in a second. Oh yeah. All right. But first, so you mentioned $40 million. Mm-hmm. How many states are involved?
Dozens. Yeah, so they've got them in Washington. They've got them here in Virginia, in Rhode Island, in Massachusetts. Courageous Rhode Island likes to claim they're the only TVTP program in New England. That's actually not true. There are others, but they are certainly the most sinister. And it's because they allow the DHS to tap into an existing lobbying network. This is how the DHS can control state legislatures, can control school boards.
You mentioned the word sinister before, but for Courageous Rhode Island, but I think even more sinister is what we're about to talk about here. So at the top of our article on oceanstatecurrent.com, we use a, I'm not even sure where I got this. I think I got this from Judicial Watch. But you just mentioned it. The money that the Department of Homeland Security is using was actually money that was allocated by the Trump program to fight terrorism, actual physical terrorism. And now the Biden administration is using this money to fight against conservatives and Christians and to indoctrinate kids into making it seem like we conservatives are terrorists. I mean, am I exaggerating here?
You're absolutely correct. So here's an example. In an Ohio TVTP program out of Dayton, they include in their pitch document to DHS, with DHS rubber stamped, a conference with a DHS agent at it that shows a pyramid of far-right radicalization. And on this pyramid, it shows the MAGA movement, the Republican Party, Fox News, Heritage Foundation, Daily Wire, leading to militant neo-Nazis. So the DHS is saying that they view the political opposition, and not just parts of the political opposition, but the entire Republican conservative movement as terrorists.
All right, so that's the national view, cooked up by the DHS, working with dozens of states throughout the country, spending up to $40 million, at least $750,000 here in Rhode Island.
Yes.
But they don't just stop at that. As our headline says, they also collude with state agencies to execute this indoctrination of our kids. What can you tell us about what you know about what Rhode Island interests or agencies or nonprofits or people are involved?
Well, let's start with the Rhode Island Department of State and Greg Amore. So Greg Amore, the Secretary of
State's office, as we call it. Okay, yep.
So Secretary Amore, back when he was State Rep Amore, he worked with this Media Literacy Now group to mandate media literacy in Rhode Island. Which
now, let me jump in here real quick. Sorry. Is there a difference between media literacy and civics literacy? Because we've had a big push for civics. They seem to be both left-wing indoctrination schemes, but are you separating media literacy from civics literacy?
So I'm not actually familiar with that term, civics literacy, but it wouldn't surprise me that they're jumping around with their vocabulary.
All right, back to your story. Sorry. Yep.
Yeah, that's good to know. Civics literacy. Yeah, so media literacy, which was about censorship, about putting ad fontes in schools. Then the Department of State started working, once they got the TVTP money, working to, and keep in mind, Secretary Amore, he's a chief elections officer. His job is to run elections, but he is working with this lobbying group, Media Literacy Now, openly. He speaks at their launch event. He lets the lobbying group ghostwrite his speech, where he says, we've been too concerned with individual rights. We've forgotten about the collective group. The lobbying group writes that speech. He gives that speech to them.
How do you know the lobbying group wrote that speech?
Because we public records request APRA, that's the Rhode Island version of the Freedom of Information.
Yeah.
And we APRA'd Secretary Amore's communications. And his assistant, Lane Sparkman, she was actually gifted a $50 gift card for her help, paid for with taxpayer money by this lobbying group, paid for with federal taxpayer.
So you have direct email evidence that they sent him a speech to you. So he's basically doing the bidding of this anti-free speech group.
And they're doing his. He helped ghostwrite, and with his assistants helped ghostwrite the Courageous Rhode Island Manifesto. This is, and they even are public. They say that the Rhode Island Department of State is their official partner in this project. And this is what people like Secretary Mayorkas have envisioned. They talk about a whole of society approach. They want state agencies, federal agencies, big tech, academia, left-wing activist groups, all working together.
And academia, K-12 schools, right. Yeah. Whole of society approach, government, private sector, academia, big tech. Wow. All right. David Cicilline, the
Mhm.
former Rhode Island congressman, now president of the Rhode Island Foundation, had a significant role in this as well. Please explain.
Yes, so he helped secure the funding. He also had worked with
Which
media
funding for Rhode Island?
for Rhode Island for
Okay.
the TVTP funding. He wrote the letter saying, "I recommend this project, my stamp of approval." He'd worked with the Media Literacy Now before. Keep in mind, David Cicilline, when he was in the House, he was the congressman on censorship. He introduced legislation that would effectively mandate that big tech platforms silence conservatives, and would threaten crippling fees on these platforms if they didn't stop so-called disinformation. Then he secures funding for Courageous Rhode Island, and to repay him, they create a glossy, expensive, taxpayer-funded podcast. He's one of the first guests, and he gets the hour to talk about the need for censorship and how the Republican Party is a threat to America. He's talking his book, he calls it It's House on Fire, and in it he says the threat to America is the Republican Party.
He says that?
Yes. I
All
mean, this
right.
is a deeply
So
partisan
he wrote a letter to Congress,
Secretary Mayorkas, yeah.
to Mayorkas,
the Department of
recommending
Homeland
the money
Security.
be sent to URI to set up these this Courageous Rhode Island and these other anti-speech advocacy groups, left-wing groups. Okay.
Yes.
Now, all right, obviously the money comes in. Interesting. I wonder if this could help explain why he resigned. And now he's at the Rhode Island Foundation, which is a huge and influential organization in our state that works too closely with government. Nonprofits should not be doing the bidding of any government, but they do, and they have under former head Neil Steinberg. But David Cicilline is now the head. Do you think there's a tie in there?
Absolutely. So that's a convening authority in the Department of Homeland Security's whole of society approach. They need these supposedly nonpartisan but activist groups that have huge influence in a state to be able to do the things that the federal government can't do directly.
Such as
Pushing for these media literacy mandates, lobbying state legislatures, and ultimately coordinating with big tech platforms to censor. Now, another thing I didn't mention earlier about Ad Fontes and NewsGuard, they work with companies like Meta and Microsoft and Google to censor, to block ad revenue to conservative sites. That's one of their objectives. That's something they brag about on their websites. This can now be coordinated, starting with federal money, but then filtered through these supposedly independent groups. David Cicilline, he worked for years in the Congress to try and mandate censorship, but he was not ever able to pass that legislation. But now he realizes he doesn't need to do it through legislation. He can use the federal money to pressure these companies to censor just from the private sector.
And now, by resigning from Congress and assuming the head of the Rhode Island Foundation, he's now in a highly influential position here in Rhode Island to make sure this media literacy scam gets perpetrated and funded and supported and lobbied appropriately in our General Assembly. He's now in a position to follow through on that here in our state directly. When he couldn't do it as U.S. congressman through Congress, he can now do it as head of the CEO of the Rhode Island Foundation. Do you think David Cicilline's background in pushing for censorship against conservative and Republican entities would be strong enough where that might be the reason he left Congress and came to the Rhode Island Foundation?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is a man who made it his mission. I mean, he was in the U.S. Congress. He could have decided to pursue any type of legislation, but he made it his mission for his time there to focus on legislation censoring his political opponents. That is what drives this man. And now he has a massive web of NGOs, of activist groups like Media Literacy Now, like the Rhode Island Foundation, which he runs, that he can now use to pressure for censorship. This is what drives this man.
Well, not days after he took took the CEO position here in Rhode Island. This is a little bit of a tangent. He was scheduled to be the featured speaker at a fundraiser for the Rhode Island Democratic Party. And even the Rhode Island media said, wait a minute now. You're the head of a nonprofit. You're supposed to be, by IRS standards, nonpartisan. And while technically you might say there's a line between what you do officially and your capacity is, I know this because I have to live by these rules as a nonprofit. There might be a line between what I do in my capacity as CEO of a nonprofit and what I do on my personal time outside of work. But it's a bad look. It's a bad look when a new CEO of the largest nonprofit in the state is out there openly advocating partisan politics for the Democrat Party. So you're right. The guy is immensely partisan. And do we know yet, Tim, of any official tie between the Rhode Island Foundation and the Courageous Rhode Island and the URI lab?
Yeah, he's bragged on the podcast that they're one of the partners. Yeah. And Cicilline, he was involved from the beginning in Congress, but then
now, did he do this? Wait a minute. Did he do this podcast as a congressman or as CEO of the Rhode Island Foundation?
He did it in his final week in Congress. And in this podcast where he calls for censorship, rants against the Republican Party, demands transing of children, in that same rant, he's bragging, I'm now starting the Rhode Island Foundation. I will be way more effective here. We can accomplish so much. I can pursue these goals as head of the Rhode Island Foundation. He shot this podcast days before he joined the Rhode Island Foundation. It actually was released by Courageous Rhode Island once he left Congress and once he was back in Rhode Island.
All right, now this is a little speculation here, but I know you had originally sent me a link to a page where Rhode Island Foundation was officially listed as one of the partners of Courageous Rhode Island, but now that listing is not there on the website. I think they might have got caught with their hand in the cookie jar to Rhode Island Foundation, and they want to be separated. So what do you think about that, A? And then obviously, is there any way we can find out if money starts flowing from the Rhode Island Foundation into this illicit initiative?
Yeah, there might be a way to find it out, which is to keep public records requesting the University of Rhode Island, because the one downside that there is to this whole society approach is if you're using these government institutions like the Rhode Island Department of State or the University of Rhode Island, that actually people have a right to see what those communications are. And that's how we were able to expose it, using Rhode Island's Access to Public Records Act. So
would any donation from the Rhode Island Foundation necessarily go to the URI's Media Lab, or would it go to Courageous Rhode Island or something like that?
Odds are it would be, if there were any money, they'd be going through Media Literacy Now, the lobbying group. But they get sloppy, and they could easily, not that I want to give too much away to them, but they could easily include University of Rhode Island in those discussions, considering that Media Literacy Now, the University of Rhode Island, and Ad Fontes are effectively one group. It's shared board, shared finances, shared agenda. They say they're three separate entities, but they're functioning as a single entity.
All right. I want to talk about other partners in the state, and we're getting into the weeds, but I want our audience to understand the depth to which they reach with this stuff. First of all, I won't mention I will mention his name. That's what we do here. I'm not going to be overtly critical, but there was a Republican lawmaker who's a conservative lawmaker who I respect a lot, who I know well, who I've had on this show as a guest, supporting many of the things we talk about here, but who went to the launch of the Courageous Rhode Island event, supporting it. He did issue a warning, like, hey, be careful not to cross any lines. I haven't talked to him since this report. I will, but his name is Representative Brian Newberry. He's a Republican. He's the same representative who supported the civics literacy bill in Rhode Island. I wasn't civics literacy, but it was civics education, something.
That's the Media Literacy Now bill. That was their media literacy bill. And he did that with Pam Stager, who runs the Rhode Island chapter for media.
Well, there was a civics action. I don't know if I don't know that it's the same thing we're talking about, but he did support him. And we had him on to talk about why this seems like a left-wing ploy, and he goes, no. Anyway, but he was there at the launch. He kind of spoke in support of it, but also issued a warning at the same time. I don't know how he feels about it now. So this even some Republicans, is what I'm saying, have been co-opted, whether unwittingly or not, right? A. B, even the Cranston Public Library director is part of this team. Tell us what you know about Ed Garcia and the Independent Women's Network.
Yeah, so Ed Garcia, the Rhode Island Library Association is another partner of this Courageous Rhode Island, this TVTVP funded program. And at the launch event, it was held at Cranston Public Library. The Cranston Public Library director, Ed Garcia, was one of the headline speakers, and he uses his speech in an event funded by the taxpayer to attack the Independent Women's Network for their political events that happened at his library. So I believe it was just a year ago, maybe two.
And we were involved in some of those events. Yeah.
Yeah. Billboard Chris, they invited him to speak at the library.
I've had Billboard Chris on my show. Yep.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yep.
Yeah. So there was rowdy, aggressive protests, and the Ed Garcia celebrated the protesters. He tried to block the event from being held, and then he actually shut down the library to public events. And he says in his statement, well, I don't want hate groups to have events here, so nobody gets to have an event, because legally I can't discriminate on who I let access a public space.
So while this might not be the Courageous Rhode Island effort to shut down events, this does fit with the theme of shutting down and criticizing conservative organizations, conservative media, conservative personalities. This guy who's part of this Department of Homeland Security scheme openly criticized a conservative group who's a credible group, Independent Women's Network, nationally and in this state. The fabulous people involved in that, but they want to make it seem like they're discriminatory somehow.
Yes. Yes.
All right. You mentioned a lot this German style censorship playbook. I'm in reading more, I might have been wrong. I was maybe equating it back to Nazi style stuff back 80, 90 years ago. But what is this German style censorship playbook that apparently is being used in partnering with University of Rhode Island in this effort?
So it's made by a guy named Olaf Schultz. He's one of the vice chairman in the ruling Socialist Party of Germany right now. And what he envisioned was to use children as media producers. That's his words.
Media producers, okay.
Yes, where you have children create social media posts advocating for censorship. And then this creates a grassroots movement. It seems to demonstrate there's public support for censorship. And they use this in Germany to pass censorship laws like NetZD, which means there is no free speech on the internet in Germany anymore. And big tech companies are required by German law to suppress and silence what the German government considers censorship.
All right, say that last part again.
So in Germany, and largely through this man's efforts, the big tech companies are required to suppress and silence any speech that the German government might consider disinformation.
Required by law?
Yes, yes.
By German law?
By German law, yes.
I mean, this is Soviet style. This is Pravda.
Yes, the opposition party actually, so they also put the opposition party formally under law, under surveillance, where the government gets to read the emails of the opposition party. They ban the opposition party from accessing public financing, which in Germany, which has very strict censorship laws, where
this is what's happening in Germany right now. This is what's been going on for decades.
It's going in the past 10 years. It's really accelerated. Yes, the ruling Socialist Party of Germany, it's called Alliance 90, is part of the Traffic Light Coalition, is actively censoring conservative voices and pressuring big tech companies to censor. A lot of the censorship you have
officially as law. I mean, in America, they did it under the radar and illegally, but they're openly by law doing that in Germany. And this is the model they want to bring to America.
Yes, yes, and it's actually phase 3 in the Rhode Island, the DHS funded Rhode Island program, the Courageous Rhode Island program, is to use children as media producers, where children are meant to create posts. They're paid up to $1,000 to create posts.
Wait a minute, wait a minute. All right, students are paid?
Students in Rhode Island, yes, are being paid money, being paid taxpayer money.
By who?
What?
By who?
By Courageous Rhode Island using the DHS money. And this was in the DHS grant. The DHS knows what they're doing. They're using DHS, your tax dollars, to pay children to create posts advocating for media literacy mandates, which means censorship, which means ad fontes, which means NewsGuard. And it's modeled on what they did in Germany. The State Department program is teaching teachers how to pressure students to be media producers based on this program that was successfully used in Germany to implement German censorship.
All right, Tim. So let's just be a little subjective here now. So, we've covered as much as any topic on this show, the whole issue of the whole transgender craze, and I've taken, you mentioned Billboard Chris a little while ago. He said something on the show that I repeat often, that there is and should be no such thing as a transgender child, because no child is equipped to make such a life-altering decision. They don't have the maturity and emotionally or physically. And therefore they don't know what they're doing. They're just seeking attention. They're just doing what their parents or teachers or somebody or some other influencer guides them to do. I'm going to guess the same thing is true here. When these students are writing these anti-free speech social media posts and getting paid for it, they're just useful idiot tools, right? They don't know what they're doing, or do you think they do?
No, they're pawns. They're being manipulated by their teachers, and the teachers are likely being manipulated through these indoctrination programs that the State Department DHS is funding and is coming from Germany.
This is almost, how you can't look at blood and guts on the street. You got to look. I mean, this is almost something so, yeah, I like your word, sinister, that you almost don't even want, you almost don't even want to think about it. I mean, it's unbelievable to think that it's going on at this level. That's why I wanted to show, even at the Ed Garcia, even at the state rep point of view, Secretary of State, Rhode Island Department of Education, Rhode Island Foundation. My goodness, I mean, their tentacles are everywhere. How, and are they doing this in other states as well?
They are. Rhode Island brags, we're the pilot program. We're going to take it nationwide. And they already have. They now have a spin-off group in Virginia doing the same thing. And media literacy now has chapters across America. They had another Rhode Island employee in Washington teaching her kids to make Black Lives Matter propaganda videos for class. And you mentioned the tentacles. I want to mention another one, and that is these Bloomberg gun control groups. The umbrella organization is Everytown for Gun Safety. Moms Demand Action is the 501c4.
Right.
That's another partner of Courageous Rhode Island, official partner of DHS. And Courageous Rhode Island used taxpayer money to pay for blog posts advocating for gun control. What the Rhode Island staff member in Washington did was she had her students make videos advocating for gun control. And it's a near certainty that this money that's now being paid for children to create social justice videos is used for gun control. Because to be clear, the Bloomberg Gun Control Network, Everytown, is a formal partner shaping the policy of Courageous Rhode Island.
All right, let's get a little specific more into Rhode Island now. What Courageous Rhode Island is doing. Again, you told us about one, but tell us about the two principal women involved in this.
Yeah, so there's Renee Hobbs. She founded Media Education Lab in the 90s, or in 2003, but she started her media literacy crusade in the 90s after the LA riots. She is an anti-cop ideologue, and she actually, as part of her State Department grant program, partnered with the Austin Police Department to do a woke rewrite of their police academy. And one of the things that her group argued that the Austin Police Academy should do is to stop having flag ceremonies for fallen officers because it promotes a divisive narrative, they said. She runs a
All right, so that's Renee Hobbs. Tell us about Pam Stager.
Well, I'll just want to add one other thing to hammer this point home. Renee Hobbs runs a course at the University of Rhode Island. It's called Copaganda. The whole course is just how much cops suck. She is the
propaganda. Oh my God.
The other is Pam Stager.
Hey, before we go on, is there any way that the university president, I don't even know who it is, would not be aware of this, or might have had some say in authorizing this to happen? Or is there any way this could happen? You know, some of these little, departments are kind of independent, fly under the radar. So is there any way? I'm trying to look at who else is at least aware or implicitly supportive of this. Can we place a little?
She even made a website for her course. She's been bragging about this on podcasts across America. I don't see how the university is not aware of what's happening here.
Yeah, if there's a $750,000 grant coming in, I'm sure they know. Now they do try to cover up and make it sound all innocent, right? Like, we're just helping kids be able to sift through all the social media and media that's out there. But boy, you'd have to be pretty naive not to understand what's really going on, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so now let's go to Pam Stager. You talked a little bit about her before, but what else should we know?
So she runs the Rhode Island chapter of Media Literacy Now. So she works under this lady, Erin McNeil, who is the person who founded Media Literacy Now, but also is on the board for Ad Fontes. And her job, Pam Stager's job, is basically to get Ad Fontes into schools. At the State Department seminars, for example, they have the CEO of Ad Fontes come and teach teachers how to convince their schools to subscribe to purchase this product without ever disclosing the fact that Media Literacy Now is getting money for it. They're profiting from this.
All right. It also appears, I want to go. It also appears that in Rhode Island, and you can tell us if it's happening nationally as well, that they are actually also trying to influence the upcoming presidential and maybe by extension other elections. We know the lawfare being waged. You're wearing a Trump train hat, so I'm sure you're well aware as an attorney of and I'm sure you agree, like I do, that most of these lawsuits are part of a coordinated effort to try to attack Trump and tie him up and to maybe get a conviction before the election. But Courageous Rhode Island is also directly attacking Trump.
Yes, using taxpayer money. They have $250 apiece. They're commissioning blog posts to attack Trump, to attack Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, to attack Tucker Carlson. They have one paid for by taxpayer money blog post that compares the entirety of MAGA supporters, says they're like Louis Farrakhan, one of the most hateful, anti-Semitic, evil people in America. And they compare the entirety of the MAGA movement to him. And they say in one of these posts, even though they're not supposed to use federal money to electioneer, they're saying we must reduce Trump's influence.
Yeah, I'm reading it right here. Part of their, and I assume this was right from their website, part of their open campaign, quote, "It won't be easy, but we really have to reduce Trump's influence." Another quote, "We are all living in a darker, scarier, angrier, less hopeful country thanks to Mr. Trump's influence. Are we on the verge of civil war?" How is that media literacy?
That's what media literacy is. So Media Literacy Now, they gave a definition of media literacy. It's not the definition they give to Brian Newberry when they're lobbying for the mandate, but they say media literacy is systemic change. It's cultural change. And they, in their propaganda, they actually have images of people holding up signs with anti-cop slurs, anti-police slogans, obscene anti-police slogans, because they view media literacy. They say it is systemic change. because their idea, their founding idea that they say right in their literature is this idea that they need to inoculate people against certain information. They say there's an infodemic where people have access to too much information. That information is like a virus. They compare it to coronavirus, and they say,
All right, wait a minute. Hold on here now. They're calling it an infodemic, which they believe is too much information, of course, in print, much of which goes against our left-wing narrative. And they're equating that not only in the use of the name infodemic, but overtly equating that to a disease. That conservative information is a disease.
Yes, yes. They say that there's too much information out here and people need to be inoculated against it. And they openly compare it to the coronavirus. And then they use
So it's not
tools like
it's not just conservative disinformation now, it's now a disease.
Yes, yes. We're a virus.
And they're the treatment, and their ad fontes censorship tools is the treatment for the disease.
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
And aren't they also recommending that not only governments get involved, but the UN get involved in censoring conservative media as well?
Yeah, yes. They say they got their definition from the World Health Organization, which is actually backed by communist China. And again, they're taking all their ideas straight from Germany, where Germany has the strictest censorship regime in the EU. The absolute opposite of our conception of freedom of speech, and their goal is to import that straight from Germany, straight from Würzburg to Rhode Island, and then across America.
So again, let's just underscore that everything we're talking about here, pretty much, this indoctrination of students into left-wing ideology against not just conservatives, but against Christian, right? There's clearly an anti-Christian component to all this, isn't there?
Yes.
That taxpayer dollars are being used for it, and not just any taxpayer dollars, but taxpayer dollars originally intended and implicitly now being used to fight terrorism, that somehow not only is this a disease, but it's a terrorist disease, right? So now conservative media is a domestic terrorism disease.
Yes.
I mean, you could draw that conclusion, couldn't you?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Let's start wrapping up a little bit and talk a little bit, Tim, about what can be done about this. Let's start federally. You talked about $40 million being used. First, let me ask, and this is from what budget? How many different budget years is this money coming from?
That's just from 1 year. And
for how many years has this been happening?
3.
So 120 million overall, or 40 over year?
40 for the most recent year.
40 for the most recent year. So more if you include recent years.
Yeah, and more going forward.
And did Congress specifically allocate this money for this purpose, or was just sent to this terrorism fund, and then it was Mayorkas who repurposed it in this illicit way?
It was for this terrorism fund. But now Congressman Mark Green, he got the U.S. House of Representatives, to zero out funding for this whole TVTP program, to shut it down.
Say that again. He's what? Is he a committee chair, Mark Green?
Committee chairman of the Homeland Security Committee. Yeah.
All right, Homeland Security Committee. So they have direct oversight of Mayorkas's.
And he said this is clearly being used for censorship. This is clearly being used to target conservative speech. And so he zeroed out the funding for this whole TVTP program. And the House passed that. So now it's on the Senate. And it's up to the Senate. As
part of what bill? Part of a larger
budget negotiation? Budget, which has passed the House, but is stuck in the Senate right now.
But what I'm asking is that Department of Homeland Security budget voted on separately on its own, or is it part of some larger overall budget appropriation?
It was voted separately on its own.
It would be.
Yeah, it was in the House. Now it's possible it's probably going to get merged into a larger budget in the Senate. so it'll ultimately probably be voted as a package.
All right, so Mark Green is already onto this.
Yes.
Has he made any public comments about it? I
Yes,
assume.
yes, he has. He's been a great ally for the free speech movement, a great ally of MRC. Yeah.
So he's already put in legislation and that's passed. It's in the hands of the Senate that would zero out this program. Now,
Separately, Senator Josh Hawley, after our report, introduced legislation that would ban this practice, that would ban DHS money from going to fight so-called misinformation or disinformation.
all right, now you know Democrats are going to try to pull that provision.
Absolutely, absolutely, they are.
What happens, we don't know yet. But if nothing happens, if no specific mention of this terrorism fund and this censorship scheme, that we call it happens, and DHS just gets funded as normal, Mayorkas would be free to then allocate some of those funds back to this program, right? So
yes, and that's
so
what
the only way to stop the funding is
under a CR. That's what he can do. Yeah,
right. So the only way to stop the funding would be to have it specifically passed as a provision.
yes.
And what do you think the chances of that ultimately happening are?
Well, I mean,
surviving the Senate and surviving a Biden veto.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, just this Christmas, the Speaker of the House held firm, and he got a provision in the Defense Authorization Act to stop allowing Defense Department money to go to NewsGuard. So clearly, there are conservatives out there who are willing to stand strong in this issue, and I really, really hope they do. And I want to just personally, on behalf of MRC, but say thank you to Senator Hawley and Congressman Green for fighting on this issue. I mean, this is free speech. This is the most fundamental liberty.
All right, I would ask you, if you get a chance, send me a link to that bill. I'd like to promote it a little bit. All right, let's talk about what we could do here in Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So the first thing, in the one hand, it's horrifying for Rhode Island that you're ground zero for this program, that your schools are the first getting flooded with this indoctrination, but it also means you are in the best place. Rhode Island parents are in the best place to fight it. So find out, is your school mandating ad fontes? Are your students having NewsGuard plugins installed on their computers? If so, contact your school board, talk to them. They might not be willing to work with you. Obviously,
are these censorship tools, ad fontes and NewsGuard, usually implemented on a school district-wide basis or a school-by-school basis?
Sometimes district level, sometimes school by school, sometimes classroom by classroom.
Wow.
One of the most concerning things we found in our investigation is there are certain teachers who were bringing in the classroom and not even telling their bosses. There was a school in New York.
And don't they have to buy it? Somebody's got to pay for it.
They're using their personal subscriptions that they have. You can get a much cheaper personal subscription to Ad Fontes. And so they're not actually putting on their students' computers. They're just using it, showing it in the classroom, and then telling students use the free version at home.
In most cases, you think the official school or school district is paying for this?
No, probably not in that case. In many of the schools, yes. In some of the cases, no. In some of the cases, the teachers, you'll get an activist teacher who goes out and purchases a personal subscription. This wouldn't be for thousands of dollars. This would be for much lower amount of money. And they're telling kids in the classroom, use ad fontes, and they're checking the sources that students use to see if they're approved by ad fontes. Meanwhile, the school administration doesn't even know. There was a school in New York that was dumbfounded when I told them. They had no idea that a staff member was doing this.
All right, so parents can certainly inquire if the school district itself or any government school is paying for this. That certainly should be something that should be public information through an APRA request, right?
Absolutely. Submit as many APRA requests as you can to the school boards and also the universities to find out, are they using ad fontes? Are they using NewsGuard? What are their deals with ad fontes and with NewsGuard? What kind of communications are they having with people, with the ad fontes people?
And any government or public school would have to respond as a government entity, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Couldn't do that to private universities. You could ask, right? But they couldn't do that. All right. So that's one thing that can be done. Is there anything that can be done at the state legislature level?
Yeah. So there should be clarification on this media literacy bill that that it should not be used to censor, that it should not be used to teach students what news sources they're allowed to read, that students should be able to make up their own mind about what the news is, not have it told to them by out-of-state leftists.
Now, do we know that there was a media literacy bill in Rhode Island, or is this
Yes,
all happening outside the General Assembly?
No, there is a media literacy bill that was passed in Rhode Island. It was by
When?
it was 2021. It was
All right, if you could get me the bill number, I would love to look that up and read through that bill and see if it's the same bill I'm thinking of with the civics literacy. I
it
tend to
probably
think
is. It
they're
was
different.
Greg Amore and Brian Newberry who were the sponsors.
Boy, it sounds like the same, but it was not presented as me. I mean, if it is the same bill, it was presented as civics, not as media lit. So that's why I'm really curious to look up the bill now. If you could get that to me, I'd love to see that. So the media literacy bill required what that you understand here in Rhode Island?
Vague language, but it required that schools develop and document that they're teaching children media literacy. Now, media literacy obviously is such a vague term, undefined, but then the lobbying group, Media Literacy Now, is able to jump right in and say, well, you can meet this requirement. You can make your documentation requirement by purchasing ad fontes. And here, we'll set up a meeting. And at no point did they tell the school, oh, yeah, and we're going to make a fortune off of it.
And Secretary of State Amore was the lead sponsor of that bill.
Yes.
Oh, and we're about to unload on him for some of the election disintegrity programs. He recently spoke at held a open forum, a town hall, if you would, in the southern Rhode Island area, and he could not satisfactorily answer concerns about election integrity in this state. So this guy is really going against the grain of freedom and democracy here in Rhode Island, and needs to be called out, I believe. Tim Kilcullen, I mean, we could talk for hours on this. Let me give you a chance to just put a bow on this, wrap it all up, sum it up, whatever it is you left unsaid you'd like to say. The floor is yours.
Well, the Rhode Island government and the federal government, they've teamed up to bring censorship and indoctrination from Germany into American classrooms. Your state is ground zero for it. You're not imagining that it's insane what's happening in our schools right now. But if you're a parent in Rhode Island, if you're a teacher in Rhode Island, you are in the best position to fight this. And America's counting on you. They really are.
And and it's not just the indoctrination of our kids when it comes to race theory, when it comes to the transgender movement, when it comes to LGBTQ stuff, when it comes to the over-sexualization of our kids. It's not just the indoctrination of those cultural issues, it's also the indoctrination of our kids when it comes to media. It's really astounding to what lengths the left is going here. And in almost every case, like you said, they're using taxpayer dollars to work against its own citizens. It's really, or the majority of the beliefs of their own citizens. It's really amazing. Tim Kilcullen, keep us posted, please, on any updates that you hear about in Congress or in Rhode Island or anywhere else. We'd like to have you back. We're not going to let go of this story, and we'd like to have you back on with any updates you have. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for all you're doing.
All right, Tim Kilcullen from the Media Research Center. Thank you for his very generous time today. And we thank you for tuning in here and in the dugout. Mike Stenos out. See you next game.